If you're listening on podcast, be sure to tune in to our YouTube channel for more content. The link is in the description.
Welcome to Wild and Weird Radio, a Wild and Weird West Virginia podcast.
Welcome to Wild and Weird West Virginia, a Wild and Weird West Virginia podcast. Wild and Weird Radio is missing somebody tonight. It's Joe Perdue. So you've got me starting us off today. My name is Jessi. I am with Hellbent Holler. And of course, we have with us Ron Lanham and our special guest tonight, Mark Muncy of Eerie, Florida. He has written books about all of the stuff that's very strange in the Sunshine State, including Eerie, Florida, Freaky Florida, and Creepy Florida. But today we are discussing his latest book, Eerie Appalachia. So everybody give a warm welcome to our friend Mark Muncy. How are you, Mark?
I am fantastic. How are you all doing?
We're doing great.
I love your guys' show. I've been a fan for a long time. I think I started with episode around 10. And then, followed y'all since. And
It's awesome.
Hellbent Holler is a recent addition for me. So I've been following that too. So
Thank you.
I'm excited to be here and love talking monsters, all things monsters. So
Very
now
cool.
back up where I grew up, which is up in the hills of West Virginia. So
I think that we know West Virginia has its fair share of monsters and legends, doesn't it? I mean, we always say constantly, it's a special place just because, where else can you find this much weird, right? I mean, it's something.
yeah, and that was my, the thing was I was actually working on another Florida book, and I had interviewed a gentleman about the Crestview sighting, which was a 1952 event. And it was in the Miami area, and a bunch of UFOs buzzed a school, and hundreds of witnesses, adults, kids, everybody, and it went over a 2-day period. And the big thing about that was the military came and interviewed everybody afterwards, and so it was one of those. It's kind of got forgotten because one of the kids said, "Oh, they look like helicopters. The way they were flying was hovering like helicopters." So suddenly the next day, the newspaper said, UFOs are helicopters, no big deal. It was just 10 scary minutes, and that seemed to be the end of it. And then, now with disclosure starting a little bit out in the world, people are talking about things a little better. And with the advent of social media, these kids have grown up, and they were, all in their 60s and 70s now, and talking about the things they saw. And they're like, hey, that thing on that UFO video, the Tic Tac thing, that looked exactly like what we saw. And suddenly, me being the Eerie, Florida guy who'd written, a few books, suddenly I'm getting emails saying, hey, have you written about this? Do you talk about this? And I was like, I was actually researching it. I'd love to interview you. And it was a basic thing that I went down, talked to a few of the, the kids now grown up and stuff and all this, and getting these stories, which was great. But then one guy had a treasure, and he had his dad's, old address book / diary / recipe book, all the things, that, you would have kept back then. And he had the day that it happened, and he had where the military men came to visit his house.
Oh, wow.
And his dad wrote down the names. And I was like, Freedom of Information Act, I can find some people. This is going to be great. I'm going to get some names that I can research. And the first one was like a Lieutenant Smith from Army Air Force, and I was just like, oh, that's not going to help me any.
Yeah.
And the next one was Captain Sinclair of the Coast Guard. I'm like, now that I can probably get some leverage with, because that's not a common name, and Coast Guard's a little easier to get records on. And then the last one just said government man.
Wow.
Cold.
Cold.
There you go.
And and immediately my head exploded. And I'm like, OMG, this is crazy. I'm goosebumps right now just seeing that name on that page. And I'm like, you have no idea what you have, because he had no idea who.
He didn't know the legend.
He didn't know the name, and he doesn't know, anything. And I asked him, I said, do you remember that guy? And he's like, yeah, I don't remember him saying much. He just kind of stood back there and smiled. And I'm like,
Even
and
better.
so I had to explain to him a little bit about who Indrid was and why it's so important. This would have been 6 months after the Derenberger incident.
Oh, wow.
6 months.
Even more significant.
Yeah. So is he working for the government now? And so cool. I immediately, was like freaking out about this and telling him, all right, we need to get this out. We need to, this is the most valuable piece of paper, I think, in the UFO community ever. And he's like, well, I can't publish it. It's got my grandma's phone numbers and all this stuff. I'm like, let me just take a picture. And the problem is the guy is kind of, he's a political figure down there. So I don't want to give too much information away.
Yeah.
But because he still doesn't want to go fully public yet. But he is like in his 60s and he's about to retire. And then he's like, yes.
Yes.
But
awesome.
He's like, you can talk about it. Just don't mention my name. Don't mention this. And I'd have pictures of the page should anything happen. He let me take pictures. He just wouldn't let me, have. I'd love to have had the original, but it's one of those things. But then immediately talked to our good buddy Shannon LeGros on Into the Fray,
mm-hmm.
and let her know I had a bombshell. And I immediately started going, well, this totally changes. I have to put a whole chapter on West Virginia's Indrid Cold in my next Florida book. And then I was like, well, but to do that, I got to talk about Mothman. To do that, I got to talk about Grafton. And then I'm like, so I went to my publisher and I said, this Florida book's going to have like a third of the book's going to be about a series of UFO incidents in West Virginia area. And then they're like, well, how about you write a book about that? And then you can just refer to that in the Florida book. We'll just push the Florida book back a year. And I'm like, okay, sounds good. Then 2020 happened and the world ended.
Yes.
And
yes. That's why we're here. That's why we're here, Mark.
Yep. Here in the afterlife. And I wasn't able to get all the interviews done and all this. So I wrote back to the publisher and said, can I expand this a little bit? Because my family is right on that. We live at that tri-state corner near Ashland. Mm-hmm. Actually in Louisa is where my family's from. But we have family in Ashland and that whole area. So Huntington, Asheville, Ashland, Ironton, all that area is where I kind of grew up. And so I was like, and we had a little holler monster in Kentucky that was my love of my life and kind of started all this when I was a kid. So I wanted to expand on that. And I'm like, well, let's just spread this a little bit. Since I've got another year to work on this, let's make it, I want to do basically Kentucky, Ohio, West Virginia, the tri-state. And they're like, well, we already have a haunted tri-state because every time there's 3 states near each other, people call it tri-state. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, well, all right then. And they were like, would you do the whole Appalachian Trail? And I said, wow. And they're like, we'll give you another 6 months. And I'm like, okay. So I put the call out on every paranormal team and every cryptid research group I could reach and said, all right, I have 6 months to drive around everywhere and find what I can find. I'll take a little bit of time off the day job and we would do all these random trips and we would go investigate these holler stories and everything. And that's the book. It was a collection of those, and the ones that are, of course, the heart of it. The first part is the Mothman flap and Indrid and all that. You got to start there. But then, we go back to Hopkinsville and we go on to, the major ones, right? You had to do that. But then we start going into the past and we dig into, the Crosswick Serpent and how that ties into Mishipishu and how that ties into Serpent Mound and how that ties into Alligator Mound and, using some stuff that, only recently has, come to light from archaeological expeditions and stuff. And then going back to the original stuff as well, the original reporting and the original accounts. And then I just started collecting all these great little holler monsters because suddenly people were opening up about them. And that became a whole third of the book was just these awesome stories. As long as they had 2 or 3 people who knew versions of it and had experiences with it, I was like, okay, that's good. It's not just, some local goofy legend. I like those too, but I really wanted stuff that had some claws to it.
So you have some rather obscure, like kind of new type cryptids that we really haven't heard of in the mainstream cryptid community at this point, included in this book.
Yeah, I was very excited because I know at least 3, but see, I did that in Eerie, Florida too. I put a couple in there that I thought nobody knew but me.
Right.
And of course, a dozen people come out of the woodwork going, "Oh, I knew that one. I knew that one." But
well, we have the internet. So.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So, but I think there's a few in here that I'm pretty sure I have, because one family, there's one in particular that we've kind of dubbed it the Huntington Hobgoblin, but they called it the Bogeyman.
Okay.
And it was at a mine near Huntington. And they, the only thing I have on this is letters from a brother to another brother who worked in the mine talking about the strange things that happened there. And the family shared these letters with me, which was amazing.
Wow.
You always love that stuff, right? And this was, and this brother's right. His brother's like, we were clearing out a new section of the mine, and we stumbled into a cave. It opened up into a wide open cave, and there were these things eating a bear.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and the way the guy describes them as disheveled and lanky with big eyes, and immediately in my head I'm thinking Gollum from Lord of the Rings.
Right.
I just can't get that out of my head the way this guy describes it. And they didn't even seem to care that this whole wall had collapsed. They just kind of look up at him and then go back to eating the dead bear that they'd killed. So they've obviously pretty powerful killing a bear. So the miners all fled, right? Nothing to do with this. These are demons. These are devils. We don't want to deal with this. So they refused to go back to work. So the mine owner says, fine, I'll hire men to kill the bears. And so the next day, men come in, and I guess a week passes after they've killed all the bears. And he said he saw him dragging some of them out, in his letter. So it's this weird long letter, but it's funny because the letters also talk about how's Aunt Silly, and is the marriage going, next week, and it's like, and then this monster paragraph is like right in the middle of it all.
By the way,
these gunmen came in and killed a bunch of creatures in our mine. So of course that's all I got. But then that mine 10 years later has a major disaster with a bunch of miners with an explosion and an odd circumstances and all that. So of course it's the curse of these creatures. And,
okay.
So, and then ties into some native lore, and it's like, oh man, it's become, and of course that ties into the whole cave system. So, and the monsters there. So
in the process of writing your books, do you rely on people to reach out to you? Do you reach out to people for their stories? Do you go to books about native lore, or is it just a mishmash of everything? Like, what is your process of going through and researching these topics and going through and writing one of these books?
It all depends. I mean, honestly, 10 years ago, I could not have been writing these books the way I do because thankfully we have, social media, we have internet and all that. And honestly, when Eerie Florida hit the bestseller list, it made my life so much easier. Because that's when I started getting letter after letter and call after call, and being on, you do the circuit, Coast to Coast AM and a couple Discovery Channel shows, and suddenly your inbox, as I'm sure you all know, gets a little filled with, oh, I saw this Bigfoot here, and I saw this, and I try to steer them to the local research teams and say, hey, I'm here in Florida, I can't help you in Iowa, but here's the team that I that I know some of the people on, and it's all about networking. So that's a big chunk of it. But and then that's the thing is the teams all know me now too, a lot of them, and I work with so many, and I try to be super nice and fair with all of them because I tell them, look, I am not a paranormal investigator, I am not a Bigfoot hunter, I am not a UFO ologist. I am a keeper of stories. I'm a keeper of folklore, and I love history, and these stories disappear and they go away from history, and that's the sadness.
Yep.
And look at, like I said, Crestview disappeared. It only came back in the 2000s. We should have been investigating this as much as we did Roswell, at least. And now it's under Miami Stadium. So, we're never going to be able to check the ground for radiation or anything because, they built a stadium parking lot over it. So for process, that's a big part of it. They come to me a lot. That's how I started Eerie Florida. Was I ran a haunted house for 20 years, and we based it on local lore and legends. And we had an old website that said, send us your ghost stories. We'll put it in the haunted house. And so I had all these collection of stories. And then when the haunted house got shut down, I started researching them and doing history on them. But so that's how it used to be. But then when we finished Eerie and we got into Freaky Florida, which was our follow-up, because they said, oh, hey, you said you had all these other stories, let's go crazy with them. So when they see bestseller lists, they're like, yeah, let's Mark, go crazy. But that was when we really started going deeper and deeper, getting into the history archives and going back to original sources and finding crazier and crazier stories. And that's when suddenly I started getting stuff from out of state, and that's when I had to expand my reach. And so that became tougher because, in Florida, Florida's a huge state, so it's, a lot of thousands of miles on the road, where up there, that same 1,000 miles, I can hit 7 states. People don't realize how big Florida is. So that made it a lot harder for the new book, but it's still, I love going into the history archives, going to libraries, and your best friends are your librarians when you're researching a book, because I can say, hey, I heard a story about an 1866 Snarly Yow incident up near you, and I can't find the paper on it. I can't find this. Do you guys have anything? And then some librarian, not 10 minutes later, will fax me an email fax of the story reprinted in a local book about it, and then I'm like, all right, well, there's my. I don't have
a time saver.
Yeah.
But yeah, exactly. It's like, wow, and they knew exactly what I was talking about. That was the crazy thing. So, but yeah, and then again, I'm like, well, okay, so this isn't as obscure as I thought it was, and all that. But then interviewing families, that was the cool thing for this trip, because it really was. I was driving into, places I'd never seen, towns I'd heard vague mentions of, and so it lucked out. My dad many years ago was a vice president for Greyhound, and he ran the whole north region, that whole Ohio, Indiana, all the way up to Pennsylvania and even to DC. So, and I would ride around with him as a kid, as he would do all this stuff. And so I got to know all the little towns and all the little bus stations. And so it was kind of revisiting. It was very nostalgic, researching this one. So
that's awesome. I gotta ask, have you ever seen any of these things? Had any of your own personal experiences? I know a lot of people, including myself, have. And then I talked to some researchers and writers who are no, I've never seen anything, but I just really like the subject.
No, I have had several interesting things. As a child, I had an incident with our local lore in Louisa, and it's I swear it sounds like something out of South Park when you try to explain it to somebody, because he's called the bench leg of Goble Ridge.
Okay.
And he's got the head of a misshapen head of a man. He's got a wooden leg, the body of a cow, or a cat, or a big cat, depending on the version of the story. And the head glows, and he hangs out in trees and whomps you on the head with his wooden stick when you're riding under it, on horseback and stuff. It goes way back. And And I always thought that was the dumbest story I ever heard as a kid. I mean, I want to hear ghost stories. I want to hear monster stories. What the heck is this crazy cow thing that hits you on the head with a stick? Made no sense. But once I started getting into this, later on, I start researching it, and I find out, oh, there's a scary story there. But when I was a kid, we're staying in the woods out there, and the trailer is a mile away from where I was camping, and just because I want to get away from the adults, and this was the 70s. They didn't care as long as I was alive in the morning. Things were fine. And I had my BB gun. If a bear came at me, I could shoot it with the little, BB gun. That would be fine. And later on, I got to have a 22 once I hit 10. But this would have been, and we had a fire in an old bus wheel because I always had bus parts from Dad. And that was our fire pit. And I was there, and a couple friends were there. I used to bring friends from the city in Charleston. Mm-hmm. And we would come to this land, 45 minutes away. It was like getting away from it all. And we were there, and we knew there were a couple horses in the field that connected to the forest. So sometimes they would come into the forest area, and we hear hoofbeats. And we're like, oh, it's the horses. And the one came by, and then the other one came by, and they were spooked. They were running. And I was like, And so I grabbed my BB gun, and my two friends are, sitting there a little nervous and wishing they had BB guns. And then suddenly I hear movement, like something kind of running fast. And I'm thinking, is it a deer now? Something else got spooked. And I saw this crazy thing, and had a strange glow about its head. I couldn't tell if it was a human head, but it was weird. And I don't know if it was supernatural, but I got chills. I get chills again thinking about this
story
now.
Mm-hmm.
I've told the story a dozen times, hundreds of times to my all my family, and every one of them's got a bench leg story, and it just ran off into the woods and disappeared, and that was just our monster. And so I knew something I had seen. I didn't know what it was, and that piqued my my young curiosity. And of course, Star Wars comes out the next year, and then science fiction and horror just dominate my life, and so it was just coming home when I started really doing the cryptid stuff. So
that's awesome.
So yeah, the story the story to that is, the crazy story is, there was a murder there in the 1700s, early days of of that settling that area. A peddler walking along a nearby road, not the road we were on, so it obviously traveled a little bit, this story. And he had his ox cart and a little cow, pulling his cart, and he got jumped by brigands. And according to the article, because it was older article, so they were brigands, not bandits or robbers. And he resisted with a stick, and so they killed him. And then to cover up the crime, they murdered the cow on top of his grave. So how does that mesh to a crazy creature? Well, that makes sense. The story makes sense. And it's like, wow, what a crazy thing. So is that a supernatural creature? Is it a cryptid? It's a ghost story.
It's a ghost story.
It went from, and now it's a holler monster.
It's a great ghost story. That's awesome.
Yeah, and a lot, if you're not from Louisa and that particular holler, even people downtown Louisa don't know it, but Blaine Creek area, some of them know it, and they call it the Blaine Beast, and and some other stuff. So only if my family calls it the bench leg, because we like to name things stupid, I guess. But what's great is one of my nephews runs a hair salon in Michigan, in Kalamazoo. I'm gonna give you a plug here, Adam. And he made a hair gel using my wife's illustration of the bench leg. So they have bench leg beard cream.
Oh, that's awesome.
Let's get our hometown monsters.
That's great. I love it.
So speaking of your wife, I see that she illustrates your books. Do you work together to do that, or do you write everything out and then she goes through it and then kind of creates the art for it, or is it a collaborative venture from the beginning?
It's a bit of both. she comes with me on all the trips, of course, because we're husband and wife. We weren't when we started, but we were, we were close, and we were heading that way. But she's just super talented illustrator, Carrie Schultz, and she we would go, and she would, if she wasn't with me 100% of the time, she would listen to my interviews on tape and from the people describing it. But she would also go back to the original documents after I was done writing up my stuff. And then she'd give my stuff a cursory glance. She doesn't care about my writing. But then she, and she would put her own unique spin on these things. And we started that with the first one. And that, Pinky is Florida's Nessie. And he's been seen since the 1800s, almost sank a steamship in the St. Johns River. Floridians like to name things almost as much as we do. He's not the Beast of St. John's. He's Pinky because he's the color of boiled shrimp. But most of the descriptions just show this. Everybody just draws Nessie, and maybe makes it pink. But when we're reading the descriptions, he's got a shell on his back, this big spiky shell, and his head will come out of the water, and he's got either eye stalks or horns, depending on the description. So it's like a giant slug, and then one guy described it as having like a camel's jowls and all this. And so she threw all that into that illustration. And that's become, now whenever you Google Pinky the Sea Monster, her picture flashes up everywhere because everybody uses it now. So, and the publisher came up with a brilliant idea, because Carrie does amazing work in color and all this other stuff too. But they came up with this brilliant idea for the book series to make it look like the old scary stories to tell in the dark style, because they knew that was going to be our audience, was going to be little younger. But it's funny because our audience has been all ages. Everybody loves these books. So, and that's why we got to go a little darker and freaky. And then when we did Creepy Florida, our ghost book, they begged us for a ghost book because, you turn on the television, all you see on Travel Channel and History Channel is ghost stories. So,
for sure.
So that was our ghost book, and that one was fun. She didn't have to draw as much in that one because it's just ghost stories, but she still came up with some winners there. So
nice.
It's a lot of fun. And she has a blast doing it. But she is the opposite of me. She is like ghost lodestone.
Yeah.
Nothing paranormal, nothing spooky. She wants it to happen so bad, but she misses it. It's like we were at Spring Hill Cemetery, which is north of Tampa, and it's an old Civil War cemetery, and it's notoriously haunted by a Civil War spirit, and then a lynched guy's hanging ghost is seen there, and then little kids' ghosts are seen all around. And we were there filming for a local television special for local news for Halloween, and you can't get that. You have to walk out to this place. You can't drive to it, and it's in the middle of nowhere. And the film crew's all filming, and I'm telling them all this stuff, and the cameraman's just a non-believer, and the reporter's just giggling because it's a Halloween. She's playing it up real spooky, and we go over to the kids' graves, and I'm like, and if you listen, you might hear the children's laughter and all this, and nothing happens. And so we're all packing up, we're all leaving, and as we're leaving, and just as we're getting to the edge of the cemetery, we hear kids laughing, and a cameraman just freezes, and then the reporter girl is just like, what, and he's like, and the camera's all in the box and everything, so we can't do anything, and I'm like, Carrie, you were finally here for something, and Carrie was overtaking a picture of a butterfly on a tombstone, didn't hear anything.
Oh my goodness.
So,
wow.
Yeah. Fun stuff.
So you mentioned that you ran a haunted house in Florida for many, many years. Did you start doing that because you were into the paranormal, or did you get into horror and then kind of start getting into the paranormal and the cryptid thing? What was the kind of your trajectory on this? I know that you had your experience when you were a young man, but what is the trajectory on what led you into this sort of field?
All right, so it's a little interesting because, of course, as a kid, I read anything I could on it. When you're a kid in the late 70s, early 80s in West Virginia, it was not a big geek scene. I do remember building a crossbow in shop class. Imagine trying to do that now. But yeah, I was always into the weird stuff, and then that transitioned into horror because of I think it was my grandmother's love of Dark Shadows and reruns, and so it became, well, this is kind of monstery. And then as I grew older, it was reading Dracula and classic horror and stuff because that was easier to get. Um, Stephen King hadn't hit big yet, and then so horror books were always those weird covered books that you weren't allowed to look at, and they were hidden in the bookstores in West Virginia at the time. But then we moved to Florida in 1980 after the Skyway Bridge disaster, which was a famous incident down here in Tampa Bay. Bridge going over South Tampa Bay collapsed and was hit by a big, giant barge, and a Greyhound bus went off. And my dad was called to investigate because at that point it was the largest disaster ever in a bus. 23 people, died on this bus. But Dad fell in love with the area, and he saw the sunsets, he saw everything. He's like, I'm retiring in 2 years. We're moving down here. And so 82, we moved to Florida, and I left my home in West Virginia and my land in Kentucky behind. And I'm like, all right, well, this will be interesting. And then down here, horror was everywhere at that point. And, that was everything. And I worked at the local video store as a kid, and so that was, horror, give me more horror. And then I started working at a local haunted house that was hosted by the local horror host, Dr. Paul Bearer. He had a haunted house called Madame Guava's haunted attraction, and that was my first real taste of scaring people. And I was like, oh, yes, I want more of this in my life. So did that for a little while, and then worked for the Mouse, for as everyone here in Florida is required to do when they get out of high school, and are trying to move out on their own. And then got in with the early days of Halloween Horror Nights, and when it was called Fright Nights, and seeing it on a big scale haunting. And then I became a dad, and suddenly I couldn't afford to go to Horror Nights and do all that, and I couldn't take the family there, so we opened up. We built a display. We built a yard display in a couple of my buddies, and it just kept getting more and more elaborate as these stories go, and after about our 9th year of these giant displays, and we started having little walkarounds of the old displays in the backyard. Suddenly we're like, all right, that's it. We're doing a haunt. And we turned it into a full walking haunted attraction. Wow. And we had based every display on a Florida legend, something spooky. One of them was basically Blair Witch. And what most people don't realize is the Blair Witch story was based on a Florida legend called the Hog Island Witch. And the filmmakers were from Orlando, but they, just set it up in Maryland and called it something completely different. So we did 1 year that, and everyone said, "Oh, you did a Blair Witch here." It's like, we did Hog Island, but it's close enough. And that's when we started posting the stories on a website. So this would have been a GeoCities website, and I think we had an AOL email address, and I'll give you a time frame there for you internet sleuths. And that's when we started getting the stories from other people, and that's when we really started going crazy. And when we built the haunt, every room was a character from, Tampa. It expanded to all of Florida, but it was mostly Tampa Bay legends at first. And I always enjoyed when people would figure out what it was. But instead of having a werewolf jump out at you, we had the skunk ape jump out at you.
Oh, yeah.
When you're walking through, you don't know that. You just see something scary jumped out at you and you run. 90% of the people could care less what the story was. But those 10% that did were the ones that would come up to us afterwards and go, "Oh, I saw you did that. I saw you did that." And then as we got super popular, we had 10,000 people marching through my backyard every Halloween. So of course the neighbors started getting a little less and less happy. And because this is St. Petersburg, metropolitan, population 2 million, and I was getting people from Tampa. People were driving up from Miami to see this thing because we were everywhere, and it was free. We never charged.
That's so cool.
It was all donations for charity, and at the end, not before, at the end, if you wanted to, and it was nuts. And we had a cast of 50 the last few years and all this other craziness. We had police come and volunteer, and firemen came to watch every night, and we never cost anybody anything except parking. But which we didn't charge for, but it was just you couldn't park anywhere, for a 10-mile basis. Anyway, that's so that's where that's how it went, and then people started coming up to us going, "Hey, I saw you did that story. That's on Creepypasta." What the hell's Creepypasta? And I found out people had copy pasted our stories from our website into Creepypasta and Reddit No Sleep. That was the big one, was Reddit No Sleep had us. And suddenly I was like, oh man, we better do something. So we made a book. That way we could have it copyrighted, and that was one we just gave away at the haunt. It was a little self-pub thing. And then that's kind of where got back into writing. And then when the haunt got shut down, I was like, all right, well let's do the real versions of these.
That is so cool. You've actually lived my dream. You had a haunt. I used to do that to annoy the neighbors, and they really loved it. And they've actually they're kind of not happy with me now because I haven't did it for like 2-3 years. And I think they got used to seeing it.
That's what happened when we got shut down. We put in for our event permit, because we always just put in for an event permit every year, and would say haunted party, attraction. And I send them all the safety stuff. I knew more about the safety codes and stuff,
regulations,
than the city did. And so they were always good. But then we got a new mayor.
Oh,
and then suddenly we were denied. And it was, we tried for 4 years after that, but I was already doing the books by then. So I still every January just send in an event permit and pay the $50 just to see if they'll ever let us do it. But it's never. But I don't put the effort.
Never underestimate the government's ability to get in your way of
doing Unbelievable.
Exactly. But they let the Christmas lights display that has 100,000 Christmas lights and blocks traffic for 100 miles. That's fine.
I did that one too. But I don't know. I like displays that I always have. The more elaborate. I remember when we first moved here, the first year, I was doing a pretty big Halloween display, and I actually had a Pepper's Ghost type display in the window, and I was using my 3D stuff. I actually rendered some like ghosts like that were going across the screen and whatnot, and you could stand out in the front yard and you could look up the window, and every now and again you'd see this ghost fly by. It was a really cool effect. There was another year I actually projected a skeleton onto an abandoned house across from a yard. I did all these wonderful things, and I liked them, but I had no idea that the neighbors were really paying attention until we didn't do it again, and they actually stopped me on the street one day and said, "Hey, what happened?" Well, what happened was we had some family issues and some sicknesses and whatnot. And I just didn't feel, you don't go into that mode. You're just like, I don't want to do this anymore. Life gets in the way. And I just never really got back into it, And this year I'm kind of thinking I might. I don't know yet.
It's once you do it though, it is like, it's still out in the sheds, like all our major props. We still got the coffin out in the shed, and we have a full casket somebody just gave us one year, and all that.
It's so cool, man.
Yeah, it's still out there. Our shed, we built it like an old swamp house, and that's our storage shed. It's hurricane proof. That's the one thing you got to build down here. Is you got to build hurricane
proof, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Up there, you got to build snow proof.
Yeah, so, we definitely have to have snow proof. Well, sometimes we have to have tornado proof now. I don't know. The weather's shifted so much up here; it's ridiculous. So, but it's just amazing though. The fact that you're doing what I love it, because this is what we preach constantly. You listen to the show, this. Collect those stories and keep them. These are important legends. And for years, people absolutely refused these legends. They didn't want anything to do with them. This. And now, paratourism, we say it a million times. You've heard it every week. Paratourism, guys, it will save small towns. Don't run from your monsters. Embrace your monsters, because those, look at Roswell, look at Point Pleasant, look at these.
I look at the Mothman cam every day just to count how many people touch his butt.
Yes.
And it's hysterical. It's so much fun to watch. And you could be a Tuesday, in the middle of freezing cold weather in February, and I see a little kid running out to go touch Mothman's butt. And I'm just like, that's great. I'm like,
it is. And it's a legend now. See, that's the whole thing.
And it was forgotten for a long time. Of course,
Yes.
the movie helped, but
Big
and
time.
now the video games have helped and all that. But
Oh,
that's just
it's
it. Some of the ones we wrote about in Eerie, Florida, one of them's been bulldozed. That place is gone now. And then another one, they were threatening to bulldoze it. One of the cemeteries from Creepy, Florida, they were trying to sell it and put a gas station on top of it. But thanks to us and the history group that went there to document it, they did ground radar and found, oh my gosh, there's more graves here than are listed. And then they found Native American graves there. So the settlers buried on Indian burial ground and didn't tell anybody. And of course, nobody knew. So, but now we know. So now that gas station ain't going there, and that cemetery is preserved. And now they're doing research to figure out which tribe, what period, and all that. And so this little, just our stupid book, helped that. So and and that's what we hope with is Appalachia. Some of these places are already endangered, and and it's like, we got to keep these stories and we got to keep the stuff. And then sometimes the legends turn out to be something completely scarier than a monster. And the real history sometimes is so much darker. And
yeah.
One of our eerie stories turned into that, and it's one now that has become a folk tale in its own right. It was called Mini Lights, and she was and it was, if you said Mini Lights 3 times, these green little lights would chase you. But then on the south side of town, it was Mini Lightning, and she was the voodoo queen of St. Petersburg, and she had her gator boys would come out and steal your children. So these little alligator men would come out and steal your children. Carrie had a blast drawing her and the little alligator men. And it's like, and so why was it such a different story from the south side of town and the north side of town? And we didn't think much of it. It was just we're chasing, Mini Lights kind of sounds like Mennonite. There was a Mennonite fire with a boarding house, and then there was a circus fire over in Gibsonton across the bay, with some little people that got burned. So maybe that's just a cross of these two stories. And we were just chasing our tail with it, and then we're in the St. Petersburg Museum of History's archives looking for something completely different, and out falls this fan, like a little hand fan, and it made Mini Lights. We now know what it is. And what it was a fan for an alligator farm that was no longer in St. Petersburg, and it was a tourist thing. And you would hold it to cool yourself off while you were watching the alligators. And the picture on the fan was their show, where they would throw children into the alligator pit and let the alligators chase them. And these were kidnapped children from the south side of town, African American kids.
Oh my God.
Beware of Mini Lights, and the Gator Boys was beware of the men with lights, the Gator Boys. They will steal your children.
Huh.
Unbelievable.
So much worse than a alligator men and and a voodoo queen. But
we were having fun with the alligator men. This is not fun at all.
This is terrifying, and it's like, oh my gosh. So when that got out, that was that's when I was like, okay, so sometimes you dig and you find something that you did not expect. So
wow.
Yeah.
Well, you beat us there. I haven't come across anything like that. So that's terrifying, is what that is.
And that's again, nobody had ever thought. It was just Mini Lights. They were making a movie about it. Just a local Mini Lights, and then it was going to be a thing, chases you. But they knew some of the voodoo stuff to it, so they were throwing in some voodoo stuff. And then when we found that, they were like, "Oh, we have to change this whole movie." And I was like, "Yeah. Now it's a completely different movie.
It's not so fun now, is it?
Yeah.
But that's how a lot of these stories are, and this they're built on something. There's always something behind that legend. There's always something there. It may not be exactly what it says it is. But there's some truth there, isn't there?
Yeah.
And that's kind of what you found with that. It's kind of like the whole Chief Cornstalk legend with Mothman.
Yeah.
I mean, I still believe that there's something there with that. I don't think that it's what they say, but I do think that there was something definitely up with that.
I mean, there was definitely a complete betrayal of his surrender there, and of course that ties back into Poplik, which a lot of people don't realize. Those two tie together because Cornstalk was all the way out there in Louisville, in that
Yeah.
same area, and that's where Ford's Folly was the guy who founded, where Poplick is now, the Poplick River and all that.
Yeah.
He plotted all that with this guy named George Washington, he was plotting it for him so they could find places to buy land and get land for his soldiers in this thing called the Revolutionary War.
Yeah. It's funny how history does that, isn't it?
Yeah, it all ties, and it's little
all
things like that. You don't, Floyd's Folly, and you're just like, what? Oh, what? This ties into this, and then Cornstalk, and I'm like, and I just done all this research on Cornstalk for Point Pleasant, and it's just like, okay, well, maybe he may not tie there 100%, but he certainly ties here 100%, and
this is like the longest game. Like the history is basically just the longest game of telephone ever.
100%.
Right.
Yes.
And a lot of these legends are basically, don't go in that cave because something bad happened there. Don't go in that place because somebody died. Don't go in that haunted house because people died there. And it's and that's what these are. That's what they start as. But then you realize some of them have some meat to them, and and you start digging in, and you're like, whoa, this is crazy. And that's why I loved some of these stories that we got, for the especially the Holler Monster stories, because I knew nobody knew about this one. And it's like, this family has only told me and like, maybe their cousins. And it was actually a distant cousin who called me and said, hey, you got to go talk to, Nana up in the hills, and I'm like, oh, okay. I talked to so many mamas and papas and nanas, and I loved it, because they all had the OG, or as close to the OG as I was going to get. And everybody's like, oh, weren't they protective and all that? I'm like, I'm from there. I know, I wasn't a carpetbagger. I wasn't a snowbird coming home. This is a little bit of going back to my roots. And everybody's like, well, you don't have the accent. I'm like, when I'm there for 3 days, it comes back, depending on where I'm at, so.
Yeah, it can definitely come back, can it?
Yeah.
I mean, but I don't know. I think it's so cool that we hear about these legends, and like you said, you've managed to come to the same conclusion that they are rooted in something, and it doesn't matter if it's if it's what we think it is today, or what have you, or what are even they thought it was then. They can be something so obscure. It's kind of like a few years ago there was, well, a couple decades ago, I guess. There was this whole thing about, what to do with our nuclear waste. I know you've seen this. And they were going to bury it in the desert, and they were going to put up all these crazy, but they were trying to figure out these symbologies that someone would figure out in the future,
Yep.
And all that it would come down to was basically that this would be a cursed place.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like the same thing today. It's like, we look at that and say, well, of course they would still probably go in there, because there's going to be these people who go into those cursed places and look for this stuff.
Yeah.
Yes.
They may even have legend trippers in the in the native tribes. Who knows?
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, and and then, like I said, when we started expanding it, I was thinking, all right, well, our north end's going to be West Virginia, and then, of course, the Appalachians go all the way up. And people don't realize that the Scottish Highlands technically are the same mountain range as the Appalachians before everything broke apart.
Yep.
And and so I didn't go that far with it, but I took it all the way up to Quebec at the end of the Appalachian Trail, and we found some crazy stories up there, and upstate New York, and of course we had to go Jersey Devil, because you have to put Jersey Devil in, and I get every once in a while some guy will come up to me at a Bigfoot conference or something like that, and they're like, oh, you're a writer, you're just in it for the money, you don't go out hunting and all that. I go with the teams, I go with the paranormal teams, I get their story. I don't claim to be a hunter or a parapsychologist, but I want their story, and I want to see what they find, and I'll write the story of what they find, and I'll dig into the story of the place. But yeah, I sell books because I got to eat.
Well, you'd be a scribe, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Because you're following around, you're documenting everything that's going on. That's a scribe. That's just as important.
Yeah.
As any research.
Documenting these things, yes, and I just I do it with a camera, I do it with a recording devices, and I have my laptop and tablet typing away as soon as I got something, and then Carrie's there with her little sketch pad, and her camera to take pictures for reference, and And that, and then you talk about that, and it's like, and that's the same thing with, we go back to Flatwoods and Hopkinsville, where, at Hopkinsville, where the family started charging to visit the land because they had so many people swarming the land. It's like, and everybody's, oh, they were just making money off of it. Well, the family's got to eat, and they can't plant things because too many people are swarming the land. So, what, make a buck? Yeah, of course.
Yes, my friend. I don't think there's anything wrong with making a dollar for the work that we do on some of this stuff. I mean, first of all, it's not free. What we do is not free. You travel, as well as I do right now. That's an incredible cost.
Whole new world. Yes.
Whole new world. We have equipment on our end. You've got stuff on your end. It's the same thing. And people, they can't expect you to do it 100% free. They really can't. And now we've always done free investigations. That's it. That we will never charge for an investigation.
No, I'm all for that too. And it's like, in some of these places that charge admission to go in, I'm like, like there's a famous house here called the May Stringer House, and people were mad because it's $100 to go overnight. Or look at Waverly, or look at Trans Allegheny. These places need restoration. They need the money to stay around. Otherwise, they are going to be bulldozed because they can't fix the roof. They can't fix these. Look what's happening to Penhurst. Penhurst turned it into a haunted house. They've saved a lot of it, and it would have been completely gone had they not done this. And done the things they've done for money for it. And so, more power to them. It's, and that's teams and stuff like that. Yes. If if they're charging you an arm and a leg, that's ridiculous. But if they're asking for gas money and a pizza, come on, that's okay. I'm okay if a team does that,
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Where do you draw the line? All right. That's up to you all. But I think, honestly, and if you are asking a team to come investigate your property, at least, be courteous, be kind, you invited them out there, but also don't go to places you're not invited, so,
yes,
that's the one thing we're big on is don't poke the bear. We don't poke the bear. We don't taunt the monsters. We don't provoke the ghosts. We don't do that, but we also don't go anywhere that's trespassing. And I don't put anything in the book that is on private property.
That's awesome.
That nobody wants you to go to. Now, if there's a place that they're okay with you visiting but not going in, I'll put that in the book, and it's that sort of thing. So we've always done that because and people are like, well, why isn't that in the book? Well, you're not allowed to go there. Why didn't you do this story? Well, it's not legal to go there. Or honestly, it's kind of weird, and I don't have enough credible evidence on it. So there is a level there that it has to reach.
A lot of people do use books like yours as starting points when they start their paranormal research and investigations. They use books like that as their initial resource to find places to go and investigate. So I think that's a good rule of thumb that you go by there.
Yeah, 100%. And we knew when we were writing it was going to be a travel guide. So we did it from like Panhandle across, and then zigzag down the interstates to the Keys. And we always ended in the Keys because Key West could have, has dozens of books about it. And St. Augustine has dozens of books about it. Casadega is kind of a little lesser known, but still has lots of books. But we love places like Amelia Island. Nobody talks about Amelia Island. It had pirates ruled it for dozens of years and crazy stories. And we love the Barden Boogers, probably one of the most famous monsters that nobody talks about. He was a skunk ape, Bigfoot, but he had a glowing lantern that he would always carry, and he would see the lantern before you'd see him, and then when he would fade away, the lantern would still be seen. So kind of spooky, spectrally.
Wait a minute there, Mark. I'm going to stop you because you just tiptoed right into something, and Jessi's smile tells me she knows exactly what I'm talking about. That's the same thing that we're hearing with these orb sightings, the actual UAPs, as we're now starting to call them, because why not? Everyone else does. Yep. But yeah, that's what you just said. So
100%.
Yes.
And this is an 1800s legend. So it's been around all that time. And a lantern, a light, it makes sense. And then he disappears, he fades into the jungle. That's that cloaking that everybody talks about that they do and all this. And I just love him because they always said he had like his tongue hanging out all the time. I'm like, because it's Florida, it's 1,000 degrees here. We're 3 inches from the sun. And if you're covered in hair, you're going to be panting too. I'm like, and I love him. And in the 60s, a newspaper in Jacksonville, which is not too far from there, they started writing articles as him, like editorials, as the Barden Booger would sign it, And so he kind of got a kooky name. And then in the 60s, they made the Barden Booger Boogie. But then he disappears, from Florida history, and it's sad because I think he's amazing, and and then now it's like, wait, it's full circle with the orbs
Yeah.
and all that with Bigfoot, and so it went from a goofy legend to now people are studying it intently and
Yes.
looking at it a little more serious. So
Revive
we'll
it.
see.
Revive that legend because it's, it, I've said it a million times. Someone's legend could solve, not really solve a mystery maybe, but help answer some questions, 25, 30 years in the future. That's why it's important to gather these stories and preserve them the way that you're doing it.
Yeah, that's why I hate it when people call it, supernatural or
Oh, yeah.
paranormal. I like calling it preternatural, stuff we don't understand yet. That's the old Shirley Jackson, term for it in The Haunting of Hill House. That's what she called it when they were sciencing it. He's like, the preternatural of one generation becomes the natural
Mhm.
of the next generation. I mean, just like I said, 50 years, 1950s, they didn't really understand plate tectonics. People are like, hey, Africa kind of looks like it would mesh with South of the America. Ah, that's cute. No, yeah. Now
Yeah.
we understand, and
Yep.
quantum theory is just starting to become a thing, and we're starting to realize, hey, space is curved, time is curved. Wait, this was theoretical stuff. Now it's, oh, here we proved it.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
it's, like I said, it's one of those things. I think we're on the cusp, and with disclosure and all that, I think we're gonna see a new space race, but it's gonna be preternatural. I think a lot of places are going to start, realizing, hey, there's more to this. It's not just, ha ha, look at the
Oh,
guy in the
yeah.
tinfoil hat.
Oh, it's
It,
happening. Yeah. Every day we see it. You see it too,
yep,
Mark. Every
The
single
blow-up's
day.
happening.
yep,
Yes. Just this past week with the whole Chinese thing.
exactly.
I mean, that was basically the Roswell cover up all over again.
Mm-hmm.
One
Because
day,
immediately the next day, oh, retract, retract,
retract.
retract. No,
Yep,
no.
we didn't say that. Oh, by the way, we relieved that guy from his job too.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
FYI. But yeah, that's how you get conspiracy theories going. You don't do that stuff.
yeah. It's and it's so funny because when we talk about this stuff, and it's like, yeah, and I'm at conventions and I speak at a lot of comic cons and paranormal cons down here, and thankfully I'll be heading up your way, hopefully up to Mothman Festival and a few other events up there. So
Yes.
now the new book is out, I can spread my wings a little more. I'll be speaking at Dragon Con in Atlanta in September, Labor Day,
Yeah.
and then hopefully Mothman right after that. But when I'm talking at these cons, at the end, I always try to have a few minutes, say, "Hey, tell me your stories. Give
Oh,
me
you're going to
something."
be speaking at Mothman too?
I'm hopefully
Oh,
that's
awesome.
Wes says maybe.
Oh,
So
we got to hang out at some point
oh
then.
yeah, definitely. I mean, we're
We
in
got to.
the on the trail of UFOs, dark skies
Yep.
together, but we never saw each
Yep.
other.
We never got to see each other. Yeah, guys, that's how editing works. We never actually got to sit beside each other.
No,
Kind of
no,
like right now. But yes, we definitely have to compare some notes. There's no
yeah.
question about that.
Oh yes, definitely, definitely. And yeah, and that's that. But I was at one of those events, and I'm talking about this one guy stands up and he's like, "Hey, I saw this weird thing that happened over on this side of the state in the 1980s. You ever heard anything of it?" And then he starts going into a little bit. I was asking, "So where was this?" And then, sure enough, right on the other side of the room, some guy goes, "I lived there and I saw the same thing like 6 weeks after that." And it's like, so there's something there. And these two guys didn't know each other, and now I have something to research. And then so I sent a Bigfoot team into the area and said, "Hey, this isn't exactly a Bigfoot, but it's along the lines." And then it tied into an old 40s legend in the area that I had never heard of. And so that's going to be in the new book, so I got to save that one for there, but it was pretty cool. um and that's how these things go, and that's the nice thing about being where I'm at now, and I'm getting all these emails and things. Suddenly I can go, hey, this guy just emailed me that 2 days ago. I get something, long description of something. I'm like, hey, somebody just sent me that like 2 days ago, and realize, oh, same interstate, 10 miles apart. All right, something traveled 10 miles in a day, so um
You're gonna end up with one of those maps on the wall with all the red thread going everywhere. Just
uh yeah, it's
He's
off
got one.
camera,
It's
so I
it's
can't.
back. Yeah, it's probably off here to the side.
Yes, over there by Darth Vader's helmet and the Flatwoods lantern. So
I saw the Flatwoods lantern back there. Yeah, that's
yep,
cool.
yep. Oh yeah, no, I've got a collection, so it's how it works. So
Mine's
but
behind the green screen, so you can't
it works.
can't see it. Yeah.
That works. Yeah, my oldest daughter is moving out in a couple weeks, so that's why I got boxes and boxes behind me. But for those of you not watching but are listening at home, so yeah, no, we're I can't wait to hit the road for this one, and then we got so much more to do, and now I'm hoping that this one does like what happened with the last with the Florida books is that I get even more. I'm like, please send me your monster stories.
More.
I
Yeah.
want every holler monster documented because they're gonna go away if we don't.
No, they are. Absolutely are.
The grandmas, the mamas, the papas, they're not going to be around forever,
Yep.
and the kids playing on their phones, they don't care about like me. I was in the 70s and I still didn't care about the creature with the wooden leg and the goofy head, and now it's I'm hoping it lives on way beyond me. So.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And the best thing that can happen is what's happening now in the UFO field. It's being taken more seriously. So the next general consensus is that if they're going to take this serious, then come on, we got to take some of these cryptid sightings serious,
Yeah.
especially with Bigfoot.
Especially the ones that tie into the UFO phenomenon. So.
Right, Jess. I mean, I think so anyway. So I think we're going to see that at some point, and it's kind of like you're saying.
Less than a generation ago, people, chiropractors are still. They're still not 100% approved by the by the medical associations and stuff, and doctors get mad. The big thing in Florida, they were trying to open a school of chiropractic medicine at Florida State, and they were so mad about it. The doctors of real medicine, they put up this fake school map with the School of Cryptozoology, the School of UFOs, and the School of Parapsychology, and I'm like, oh, well, why not? Let's do it. Let's go all in. But that's just it. People, that was one generation's hocus pocus, and now here we are. And we full circle.
Yeah, we're rolling back the ridicule and a lot of this stuff gratefully. But the thing is, we've got years and years of ridicule to roll back in a very short time, and that's kind of what we're seeing that's happening right now. So, hopefully continue. I don't know. I mean, I kind of see definitely a progress that's taking place. I never thought we'd get this far,
No, exactly. And and that's the one plus, like I said, talking to all these Crestview kids, no longer kids. I always have to say that. But that they wouldn't have talked about this 20 years ago. And and I keep hoping for a deathbed confession from some military general or something that had something to do with it, or something. But fingers crossed. But we throw in Right Pat into this book because of a couple stories that tied. It's not far. It's not Appalachian, but it's Appalachian adjacent, and they do a lot of maneuvers over the Appalachians. So.
Oh gosh, yeah. There's a lot of weird things in the Appalachians. Let's just say that.
Yep. And so we were able to throw that all in, and then of course we did our section on all the wonderful different Bigfoot and and Sasquatch and our northern skunk apes. So
the northern kin.
Yeah.
The northern kin.
And so we did everything from the Apple Devils to the Ohio Grassman, which that was one Carrie had a blast drawing because everybody kept saying rock star hair. I mean, every description said something like rock star hair or something like a rock star would look like and all this. And so I'm like, what does that mean? What does rock star mean? Because that could be anything. And then you would look at the time frame, and then we would finally get a couple of the original witnesses, and then they would describe it, and you realize, okay, it's kind of Rastafarian. So, and it's like, okay, that makes a little more sense, but like spiky Rastafarian. And so once Carrie got to work on that, it was like, is this your card? Like an old magic trick. We'd show it to those witnesses, and they'd be like, oh my God, that's it. That's exactly it. And it's like, okay, I'm telling Carrie she's got to start as a police, sketch artist now, but just specializing in monsters.
That's hilarious. Yeah, I do that with UFO sightings from people from time to time, and it's pretty fun when you get it, and they're like, "That's absolutely it." You know, that's really cool to do, though. So I am excited for you, actually. What's coming up, though? What's in the books, so to speak?
Well, let's see. I filmed a documentary on Robert the Doll down in Key West, and I got to be there when they brought Robert back to the artist's house for the first time in 30 years, the house where he was originally, stationed. So Robert Dahl is one of our most infamous creatures down here in Florida, and you can go visit him. down in Key West. And I was there for that documentary. I got to be a talking head on that one, and that'll be on Discovery Plus. But I don't know if it's going to be HBO or Discovery Plus because of that whole buyout thing. But that's coming in August, right around Mothman time. We're hitting the convention circuit and the bookstore circuit for the new book. After that, we're working on a children's book. And I can't give away too much because it's still early days. But then we're doing the Florida book that started all this. And then I think by that time we'll have enough Appalachia research done to get that out. And so that's just the next couple years. And I'm on a couple other shows coming up. I don't remember. I filmed a thing with Expedition X, but I don't know if it's going to make it. You film these things.
Oh, I know exactly
they don't
how
make
that works.
They're on the cutting room floor and all that.
Yep.
I was on Seth's first on the trail of UFOs, and he filmed it all down here and accidentally deleted all his Florida footage. So I'm only on the Blu-ray special edition as the behind the scenes stuff. So that's why he had to bring me back for that second one.
Yeah, that's Seth for you. He's good. He's really good.
We love Seth, but definitely, and he helped me out getting into a couple places that I wouldn't have gotten without. So, so all big props to him and Shannon LeGrove into the fray. It's so it's doing the podcast circuit and the radio circuit and a lot of local TV all around Appalachia. So I'll be driving quite a bit September, October, much to my day job chagrin. But
that's awesome. You're spreading the good word.
Yep.
You're trying to keep the legends alive.
Your first 3 books, Eerie Florida, Freaky Florida, and Creepy Florida, are available now. Is Eerie Appalachia on pre-order right now, or is it available?
As of recording, but it officially goes live tonight at midnight. So
when this comes out, you can actually go and order it from his website right now. So
go do it right now.
Do it right now. Do you have any socials you want to plug before we head out, or any final words that you'd like to share with our audience?
Well, yeah, you can follow us at Eerie Florida or Eerie Travels. That's the new, since we're rebranding is expanding, but Eerie Florida is like home, so that'll be where most everything will still be. But Eerie Travels is growing, so we'd appreciate any follows there. And you can find that on YouTube. I do a local news segment every couple weeks, and they rebroadcast it as a 30-minute little show on YouTube, which is pretty cool. And then that would be, and then just EerieFlorida.com or EerieTravels.com has links to everything. So
perfect.
That's awesome. Jess, well, first, Mark, I want to thank you for being here. I know we tried to schedule this before and had a little issue, but glad to get you back on here. We'll have you back on again. I mean, if you want to come on, you can definitely come on and talk monster with us.
After you read it and you want to know the ins and outs of any of those, just let me know. And those who do buy, appreciate a review. And if you guys plug a review in after you've made the search, we'd love it. I love honest reviews. But I would love, if you guys got a couple of those, you're like, hang on a second, this is weird. I will tell you exactly how I discovered it and, how the trail led me there. So
that is awesome.
Very cool.
Jess, do that thing you do.
Do that thing I do. Well, thank you guys for watching this episode of Wild and Weird Radio. I know we were sans Joe today, but he has a really good excuse. He was actually killing one of those cryptids that he threatens to kill every time you people don't like, share, and subscribe to the show. It's just that's how it came together. Okay, it's actually happening. But make sure you like, share, and subscribe to our show. Make sure you watch every week. Turn on your notifications. And if you listen to it through a podcast aggregator, make sure you download the episode in addition to listening to it, because that helps us go up in the rankings. And please, oh please, write us a review on your favorite podcast aggregator, whether that be Apple or Spotify or wherever. Make sure you write a review and tell your friends about it. Share it. And make sure you check out my socials at Hellbent Jessi on Instagram. And you can find me on YouTube at Hellbent Holler. When this airs, my 3rd episode from my Land Between the Lakes series that I have recently released will be live. So make sure you go and check that out. And special announcement, Joe and I, my Joe Doyle from Hellbent Holler, we are launching our very own podcast. And we're going to start out with a commentary on our latest Land Between the Lakes series, The Werewolf Experiments. So make sure you tune in for that. It's going to be Hellbent Holler Presents Dark Dive with Jessi and Joe. So please join us for that. We're so excited to go on that little journey with you guys. And we're going to be covering all kinds of different topics in our own special little Hellbent Holler way. So as always, thank you guys for being listeners and watchers. And make sure you check out Mark's books at eerieflorida.com. You can order him there, and his new book is available right now. So go check that out. Give him an order. Get that book. Read it. Tell us what you think, and tell him what you think. And we got anything else, guys?
I think we're good. I honestly do. I'm not going to threaten cryptids. I don't do that. You know, I like to keep those legends.
Joe Perdue is already doing the deed, so
he's doing that. We don't have to worry about that.
People are happy.
I think the bench leg will hit him on the head with his wooden leg if he's not careful. So.
Yes.
Exactly. But I gotta say one last thing. My favorite thing that happened from Eerie, Florida, was our publisher got us into Cracker Barrels all throughout Florida. So the fingers crossed that Eerie Appalachia could be coming to a Cracker Barrel near you. So request it at your Cracker Barrel.
You heard it, folks. Get out there and ask for it at the Cracker Barrel. They love stuff like this in those gift shops. And there's a few more gift shops that you can find it at. So get out there and plug it. Let's keep these monsters alive. Let's keep all of our legends alive. Let's promote paratourism and make sure everyone understands this is a wild and weird world. And for that, everybody stay wild and weird.